Thank you, Matt. Alrighty, welcome to the Cloud Summit for 2022. We have a nice topic to review today, actually. It's about optimizing costs, saving money, right? This is funny because when we go to buy something, we always look at getting discounts or getting a best deal. When you go and buy a car or you buy a house, you try to get the best deal possible. But what I've seen during the past 5 years is that when it comes to cloud adoption, we many times don't do that. And within the Azure ecosystem, there are many services, and it is a cost-effective platform, but it's up to us to make sure that we use it correctly and our ongoing cost stays low. So today we're going to be looking actually on how to optimize some of the ongoing costs within the Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces experience. I'll give you some hints and tips and tricks actually on how I've been doing it during the past few years. And yeah, so far, look, I've never delivered a project where the ongoing cost went over budget. So I hope you learned something today. And as we go, if you have any questions, put it in the chat. Matt, just let me know if there are any questions. Just stop me and ask and let me know. Alrighty. Thanks, Matt. Before we kick off, actually, thank you to the sponsors. Without the sponsors, it's really difficult to run any events. Thank you to the sponsors, to the organizers for all the work that they put to make this possible, and especially to all the attendees that come to the event. You know, it's really important for us to stay together even during COVID-19 era. So because we make up the community and we drive adoption and we can help each other. So yeah, let's stay together. Don't forget to submit your feedback if you want to have a chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card. And don't forget this code that I'm sure you know where to put this code. I don't really know yet, but yeah, that's my code. A little bit about me. So I'm originally from Argentina, but I'm based in Brisbane, Australia, and I've been working in data analytics solutions for quite a while. So yeah, let's get started. So today the agenda is broken down into two main sections. The first one is the Azure section, because for you to make sure that you have a good experience when using Azure services, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this section, but I'll give you a couple of things that you're going to find quite useful when starting a new project in the cloud or when migrating to the cloud. So I think it's really important for you to understand a couple of tips that I'm going to give you, and then we'll go fully on into Azure Synapse Analytics and how to optimize some of the components within the service. Alrighty, you set up Azure Synapse Analytics, right? So you have to have an Azure tenant subscription and so on. So yesterday I had the opportunity to attend a session from a colleague here in Brisbane, Gary Crouch, and he mentioned the same, that when you're trying to adopt cloud technologies, you want to get it right from the get-go, right? So for you, your customer, your company, or if you are a provider, any of the clients that you offer services to, right? So you want to make sure that you offer the best experience possible. And Microsoft actually gave us a lot of tools, documentation, and frameworks that we can use to transition to the cloud seamlessly, which is really important. If we don't get it right from the beginning, what is going to happen is that, let's put it this way. So the trip is going to be like a roller coaster trip, or the trip might be bumpy, and we have some challenges that we have to mitigate as we go, especially with the ongoing cost, right? So I've heard many clients that they went over budget while adopting cloud technologies. Really important to get it right from the beginning. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this section, but really important to talk about governance and an operating model. An operating model is going to help you articulate how your organization is going to do things. And you might need an operating model operating model for a solution. You might need an operating model for your IT, for your team, for data analytics, for Power BI, for how to use all the Azure Synapse Analytics as well. It also helps you identify at the top level here, leadership level, actually who's going to be your sponsor and who's going to be accountable for the budget and funding that you're going to spend. And in the case that you need to justify, let's say that you need to acquire or increase the budget of funding of your project, so there is a clearly defined path you can follow to get the funding. Really important to have an operating model, really important to understand where you can go, where you have to let somebody know that, hey, you know what, this month we went over budget because of A, B, C, and D. Really important for you that you get a message across the different levels and the message doesn't stay in the operational level. Because having visibility of how we're spending our budget create trust with Azure services. That's the first one. It's about, hey, go and create the ratio metrics. It's amazing, really easy to do. Both those things, both these two things actually, they're part of the cloud adoption framework. So if you haven't had a look at the cloud adoption framework provided by Microsoft, go and have a look at it. There are many useful resources that you can use. And here you can see able to identify, remember, ratio metrics, who is responsible, who is going to do the work, who is accountable for that stream of work, who is consulted and who is informed. But you can see at the top, actually, you want to include an item that is related to billing and ongoing cost. And you want to make sure that you identify what will be the department that is accountable for the ongoing cost and who is going to be responsible for the ongoing cost, as well as consulted and informed, really important, right? Imagine that if we build a data warehouse, so the data analytics team might be responsible for doing the work with Azure Synapse Analytics. They need to be responsible as well on how much they're spending, but who is going to be accountable might be the CIO or might be the IT department lead. So you can see there is a line in the sand there. And this helps as well identify accountability, which is really important to understand roles and responsibilities within the organization. It does go a little bit with the operating model. This is quite basic. You have to work a lot in the operating model from here, but you can start small as well. It's more like a living document. Operating models, they change, they are not fixed, and you have to review them as you go. As part of this session as well, we're going to see a lot of things. It won't be only PowerPoint decks. I'll show you in the Azure portal how you can apply some of these capabilities. So I'm really big fan of management groups and alerts. Management groups that allow you to organize your services inside containers, but not just only at the resource group level. So each management group, and let's go to the Azure portal so you see them. So management groups, they allow you to allocate subscriptions inside a management group. As you can see here, they allow you have different ways to do it, but in my case here, imagine that I want to have a management group for different business areas within my business. So what I'm going to do is to create a hierarchy. What's important to have a hierarchy? There are two key features that I love about management groups. The first one is that you can define a budget against a management group. So I'm able to come here and we'll let it load. And I'm able to say that for this specific business area, I want to create a budget for financial year, and we'll define it that this will be for data warehousing solution, right? And I can include when this is going to expire and my budget amount per month. So in this case, let's say that my budget is $2,000 a month. I want to go to the next step, and this is where you define alerts. So when you hit a specific percentage of the actual or the forecast for the budget, you're going to get an email, and you can add multiple email addresses where you want to send this alert. If you haven't created the budget at the subscription level, or in some cases, maybe you're doing you have your subscription managed by a cloud solution provider, and maybe you don't see this section. So make sure that your provider set up those rules for you, because this feature here is amazing. It works perfectly. It helps you. It's peace of mind. So what you do here is say, okay, I want an alert when we hit 70%. I want an alert when we hit 90%. And you can have, I think, up to 4 or 5. And an alert when we hit 125%, and when the forecast goes to 150. And the forecast is really handy because it changes as we go every day. And then you can include who you want to send this alert to, right? Then create, and that's all. So definitely really important for you to set up these alerts and have them up and running, to have agreed upon on a budget for your solution. That will help you justify your expenditure, as well as to increase your budget for the coming years in a more professional way. What doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So highly suggested first thing to do when using Azure Synapse Analytics. And you can define alerts and budgets at different levels. At this case, you'll see the scope. The scope is the management group. And you can have different alerts at different levels, but definitely go and have a look at this. That's the first hint for today. Then reserved instances. This is where you have, let's say that you're about to start using Azure Synapse Analytics. My suggestion will be to use the pay-as-you-go subscription for the first 6 months, and then to reserve some capacity. But reserving a capacity within Azure Synapse Analytics, you're going to be able to get a discount from Microsoft. And let's put it this way: you might want to acquire 100 data warehouse units per hour for your dedicated SQL pool, and you get that as part of the reserve instance. You book that for 1 year, and then so you get a really good discount. So where can you get reserve instances? So you have 2 options: going to the enterprise agreement EA portal that I don't have access to, but you can also get them from the Azure portal, and I can show you that bit. So if I go to the Azure portal and I search for reserved instances, I can and add a reserve instance for Azure Synapse Analytics. So you see 2 plans. The first one is only for dedicated SQL pools, and they can be part of your workspace experience. And the second one is a pre-purchase plan that applies to all services within Azure Synapse Analytics. For example, the pipelines, the networking, and so on and so forth. So here you'll select what you want to get a discount for. This potentially should give me a list of what they suggest, and then you get a reserve instance. I'll tell you the 2 most amazing things about reserve instance. The first one is that you can define this to pay on a monthly basis. So you don't need to pay upfront everything. So now you can pay on a monthly basis, which is great. Even in a pay-as-you-go subscription, even if you are doing a cloud solution provider managed subscription, you're paying on a monthly basis. So this is great, and you can get a discount up to 65%. So you add it to the cart. And before I jump off, you can see here that you can use this capacity across different, in this case, different dedicated SQL pools within the same subscription, across the same billing context. So that means that you can use the same capacity, the same reserve instance with multiple dedicated SQL pools in this case. That's really important to take into account when you have multiple environments. Imagine you have a dev, test, UAT environment, pre-prod and prod-fi environments, right? So definitely go and explore reserve instances. What's the benefit? So the benefit, if we go to the Azure Calculator, that you should be familiar with Azure Calculator, is that if I go now to data warehousing, if we look at the reserved capacity, you can see that if we book it for 3 years, we get a 65% discount up to, I'll stay the same, 65% discount, and for 1 year we get a 37% discount, which is a great benefit. It's a great discount. If you don't have reserved instances, highly suggest to go and acquire one. That is going to decrease the cost, and then you can put that budget against something else. The other thing that right now, if you want to return or ask for a refund of that reserve instance, you can go and do it. So that means that there are some limits on how much of a refund you can ask for, but essentially you could potentially book a 1 year reserve instance, reserve capacity of data warehouse units, and if after 8 months you decide that you want to ask for a refund for the pending 4 months, currently you don't get penalized for that. It will potentially change in the future, but that's something that you need to take into account. Another huge benefit. I don't want to, honestly, I don't want to spend a lot of time with the Azure side of things, because I really want to navigate to the Azure Synapse Analytics key components and how you can optimize cost. You've seen now from the bigger picture, from the Azure ecosystem, how you can get some major benefits, and now we're going to look at some of the key components. A quick reminder is that as part of Azure Synapse Analytics, the most expensive resources are changed. The less cost-effective resources are those ones that they require compute power. And you can see all of them here at the bottom. So the SQL runtime, Apache Spark Pools, Azure Data Explorer, and data integration pipelines. So let's get started. So data integration pipelines, as you know, we're taking advantage of existing capabilities from Azure Data Factory. So what you're about to see right now, it does apply to Synapse Analytics pipelines as well as Azure Data Factory. So a few hints here. So reduce the default timeout for activities. By default, your activity will have a timeout of 7 days, so reduce that. The second one is that you pay when you have a copy activity, and the copy activity is the less cost-effective activity after the mapping data flows, you pay for data integration units. Well, we'll have a look at this. So make sure that you understand the concept of data integration units and you control that. This could be a dynamic parameter as well. So if you're using the dynamic meta-driven approach, I highly suggest to look at including a data integration units parameter for those assets that require a lot of compute power. When possible, replace copy activities with external tables. Why? Because the copy activity is around 1,000 times more expensive than executing a store proc that uses an external table to load information. Complement with Azure Logic Apps is really important when you are extracting information from APIs. So I'll give you an example. Let's go big. Let's say that you want to hit or extract the information from 1,000 different APIs every 10 minutes. So Azure Data Factory is going to be a little bit expensive. So you want to explore Azure Logic Apps for those scenarios because Azure Logic Apps will be more cost effective. I have built solutions myself where I still use Azure Data Factory as the orchestrator of the solution, the data movement, and then I call sometimes an Azure Logic Apps to extract the information from APIs and put into a data lake, and then I pick it up again with the pipelines and copy the information from the data lake into a database as an example. But definitely, I do believe that Synapse pipelines / Azure Data Factory and Azure Logic Apps complement perfectly. Avoid using mapping data flows as much as possible with low volumes of data. Why? Because the minimum number of vCores that you get, I believe, is 4 from memory. When you're working with 1,000 rows, let's say 1,000 rows, 100 rows, is overkill, definitely overkill. So I highly suggest that in those scenarios that if you can take advantage of a database engine for applying those transformations or data cleansing activities, go and do it. So if you are working with the big data, large volumes of information, mapping data flow, they are a great fit. But for many countries where the companies are not as big, so definitely mapping data flows could be overkill unless you work in a big company and they manage large volumes of data. So let's go and have a look. Let me see if we have any questions. No? Okay, let's go and have a look at those few things that we talked about. So you can see this lookup activity. So I highly recommend to modify the timeout. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. So highly suggest to modify the timeout here and change this from 7 days, by default is 7 days, important, and minimize that to something that makes more sense, right? Could be 2 hours, could be 4 hours, anything is better than 7 days, right? Sometimes what I do is to just copy the hours, I go to the code, and you can do either find and replace here, or you can easily find those timeouts. You can change it from here. I'll be careful with this, but say instead of 7 days, we might use, 2 hours here. So that gives you an idea. Is it really easy to find this information? Even if you have, I need to comment this. I modify a different one. So let's find another 7 days of the. See, so be careful with this option, but it's really handy if you want to modify everything fast. If you have your repository connected to DevOps or GitHub or Git, you can also find this information quite easily. Alrighty, the next one, the data integration units. So if you go to the settings, so you see here up front that you pay per copy activity plus data integration units number per hour. So you can change this and you can make it dynamic. So that means that you can bring this information from a configuration table. But definitely by default, this will be as auto, and Microsoft will do an amazing job on allocating the right number of data integration units to your copy activity. But I highly suggest that you, as a data engineer, to have ownership and control on the configuration. Why is this important? Because when we go to Azure Calculator and we look at data integration, we'll focus only in the managed VNet by Microsoft, but you have more options here. And just let me check how I have configured actually my Zoom here. I don't remember. So Control. All right. So you can see here in the copy activities. So this is your copy activity, and you pay per data integration unit. That's what we've seen before, per hour. Rounded. All the activities are rounded up to the closest minute. So that means that if you have an activity that runs for 30 seconds, you'll be billed for 1 minute. If you have 30 activities that run in parallel and all of them take 10 seconds, you are going to be billed for each one of them 1 minute, a total of 30 minutes. That's really important. And what we mentioned before about the price difference is that when you look at the stock proc, let me find it here. Okay, so the external integration runtime, I haven't seen it, I don't see it here. But okay, by stock procs executions, sorry, I was looking at the correct column. Here, the actual cost, you can see that when you run a store proc, if you run a store proc, this is what you'll pay per hour. If you run copy activities, this is what you'll pay per hour. So you can see that we're talking about 1,000 times cheaper to use store procs and external activities than using copy statement. And you might be wondering right now, okay, if you want to transition between copy activities and store procs, what are the steps that you need to follow? First of all, ideally, you have the information in your data lake. For example, I'm going to navigate to my data lake. I'm going to pick up this file from here. Let's say that currently you're loading this file with a copy activity. So what you can do is to easily create an external table. In your dedicated SQL pool, make sure that you select here, not the serverless, the dedicated SQL pool. You define the name of the external table. Let's say sales, and you might want to call this data lake schema or create something similar. So you open the script. So you create the external table in your dedicated SQL pool. And after you've done that, you have a pointer to the data lake file. And remember as well that you can use wildcards. I could potentially put a star here to pick up all the files. And once that you have the table, is a standard approach. You can create a store proc that uses the information from that external table to put it in your staging area. So once that you have that store proc, you can include it as part of a external activity in the pipelines. So once that you've done that, so we'll replace this copy activity with just store proc from Synapse. And you can see how by using the store proc, we have reduced the cost quite heavily. Really important if you are using the copy activity quite a lot. The next one, let me see if we have anything else to cover here. I'd love to go into pricing, but the only thing that I'm going to maybe give you a hint about our pricing is that Microsoft gives you this information here. And why is this important? I'll give you a hint to understand how to easily read it. So when you go to monitor and you look at the execution of your pipeline and you look at consumption, you'll see this. I'll say, what does this mean, right? So because when we talk about hours, the unit for measurement is either seconds, minutes, or hours. And here we have these weird numbers. So what Microsoft does is just divide so you have 60 minutes and an hour. So, and you know that the minimum cost is 1 minute. So what they'll do is just pick up that minimum, that is 1 minute, and split it between 60, and they'll get that number over here. After you understand this bit, it's really easy for you to go back to the Azure Calculator and multiply that times the cost that you have here for activities that are not the copy activities. And if there are copy activities, you'll use this cost here. All right, so there you have some hints for the pipelines. Let's move on to dedicated SQL pools. Dedicated SQL pools, as you know, you have pre-provisioned those resources in advance. So one thing that you need to understand is that you can post the dedicated SQL pools. So when you post the dedicated SQL pools, you stop paying for compute power, you just pay for storage. And then when you start again the compute power, so you start paying for the compute power and the storage. So this means that the less time you have your dedicated SQL pool, the most cost effective is going to be your solution. Scenarios. So definitely organizations that they don't run 24/7 an operational data warehouse, or dev test environments, even UAT environment. So those environments, they shouldn't be running 24/7. So you want to post them. Make sure that you create some automation to post the dedicated SQL pools. You have to create some scripts, so an Azure Synapse pipeline to do that work, but post it as much as possible. It's a good habit. In my solutions, development environment, as an example, it runs between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. between Monday and Friday, because nobody's working, or let's put it away, we prefer people not to be working after 5 p.m. Business days. So on weekends, nobody's going to develop anything, so we stop it. If we want to test an overnight load in the test environment, we start it at night and we stop it after we have loaded the information. But let's go and cover a few more scenarios. The next scenario is that, and I highly suggest this as much as possible, is to push your workload as much as possible to Power BI. So you can see here, standard approach, this has been extracted from the data analytics platform end-to-end architecture designed by Fabio Braga, another colleague from Brisbane. But the idea is that you move the information from source systems with the pipelines to a data lake, then you load that into your dedicated SQL pools, and then you show that information into Power BI. If there is some background noise, that's my partner teaching dance in the other room. It will be fine. Okay, so put the information to Power BI. So my suggestion is that to reduce as much as possible people who are querying information in your dedicated SQL pool and help them answer business questions in the Power BI layer. Because if you push your workload to Power BI, first of all, Power BI is really fast. Information will be in memory. The user experience will be great. And the second reason is that after you have pushed that information into Power BI, you can post it. You can post your dedicated SQL pool. And now you might be wondering, okay, but my business will load the information every 5 minutes, right? Okay, so if you load the information every 5 minutes, I'd like to give you an option. And the option is to bring the serverless alternative. So this means that overnight, we load the information into the dedicated SQL pool and we refresh the Power BI report. During the day, let's say every 10 minutes or 5 minutes, instead of starting and posting the dedicated SQL pool every time, so I'm going to consume the information directly from the data lake using the serverless option and Power BI. So you can see how the serverless option and the dedicated SQL pool, they combined and they complement perfectly between each other. So I have implemented this solution. It works. It's great, especially when the budget is tight. And then you have an option if you have to refresh something every 5, 10, or 15 minutes. Highly suggest you to have a really good reason to be refreshing the information every 10 or 15 minutes. Most scenarios within data analytics, people are not making business decisions that frequently. Alrighty. And the next one, the last one, but it's not still really important. Actually, scale up and down as required. So if you need more compute power with the dedicated SQL pools, acquire them. When you stop using them, return them to Microsoft and you'll stop paying for them. There is a downtime for that, but most companies, they can't deal with this downtime. Examples. So this at the top is when I start many of my solutions. So we get the configuration for the dedicated SQL pool, we start it, and if we need to scale up to assign more resources for the nightly load, we do it. And at the bottom, we have the end of the pipeline. So at the end of the pipeline, we refresh all the Power BI reports, we scale down the instance, and then we post it. And then if we have business users or business analysts or developers who like to query the information, they have to start it manually, and we have multiple jobs to stop it if it's not being used. And don't forget that you can optimize the resources by assigning more data warehouse units. Of course, if you assign more data warehouse units, more compute power, your queries are going to run faster, but you'll pay more. So keep in mind that you want to optimize your dedicated SQL pools and you take advantage of some of the most amazing features that we have, that you look at fragmentation, you look at data skew, you use materialized views, workload groups, and definitely having good standards for writing solutions with Transact SQL and decrease the use of our resources will also optimize the ongoing cost. All right, we are more than halfway and we have 8 minutes to go. So let's keep going. I don't see any questions. Serverless. Enable the limit. You can see the limits. We'll see them now quickly. Remember that right now, each query, even if you're querying a file that is 20 KB, you'll be billed for 10 megabytes. This is extremely cost effective, but something that you have to take into account. And if you are using a data lake for storing information, I highly suggest using Parquet files because the information is highly compressed in the Parquet files. Therefore, you're going to end up reading and consuming less information. Let's go and have a quick look. So the first one, if you go to your Manage Hub and you select your serverless pool, you see here that you can enable the limits. If you haven't done this, this is my test environment. I'm the only one who has access and can be blamed for going over budget, but definitely go and enable the limits here. And the second one is that even if the file is really small, we'll go back to the data lake here. So you see, even if I query this file with the serverless option, you see the size of the, you see the size of the file here, really small. But if I query that file, you see I don't have any rows. The size is quite tiny. But now I go to monitor SQL request, and we look at that query that happened just now. The minimum data processed is 10 megabytes. Something that you want to keep, you want to know about it. Serverless is amazing. It will still get better as we go, but there you have a few hints and tips and tricks to improve the effectiveness of the serverless ongoing cost. Spark Pools. And have to say that I queried Gary Crouch, a colleague here in Brisbane, because he has been using Spark Pools quite heavily in his environment. It's a big environment. So what you have to take into account is that you pay per vCore per hour. What does it mean? It means that if you have a node, a Spark Pool with 4 vCores, you have another pool with 8 vCores at the end of the day. So you need to find what's the right fit for your workload. Remember that maybe you have a Apache Spark Pool with 16 vCores, but if you configure your solution only to use 4 executors or 4 vCores, you'll be billed only for those 4 vCores. See how the difference is? So it's about, you might have 100, but you can configure the solution to only use 4, and you're going to be billed only for those 4. If you only have 4, you'll be billed only for 4. So that gives you some idea actually on how to optimize that. Make sure that you set the automatic pausing for your Spark Pools, and auto scale. This is quite related actually to what we mentioned here, that depending on how you use the vCores, you might go with a higher number of vCores than a lower one, and then configure your solution correctly. And remember that when you configure auto scale, that it might take up to 2 or 3 minutes to assign the new node to your solution. Check your notebook session configuration, change the default number of nodes, definitely, and the session timeout. Let me see and understand about the utilization of the session. We're going to review all these things. So I'll show you the first one, Apache Spark Pools. So make sure that in the Manage Hub here, you configure the auto scale. So if you want to enable or disable, remember what we saw before. If we have it enabled, every time that it needs to add a new node, it will take around 2.5 minutes. So you might decide that you want to scale up instead of out and assign more vCores and memory to your solution. Then definitely configure the auto pausing here. By default, you have it at 15 minutes. So if I try to put 1 minute, the minimum is 5. So make sure that you manage this as well, and you configure this correctly. This is at the engine level. Now we're going to go down the session level. Cautious of time, but I think we're going to make it. So at the session level, so I'm going to pick up one of my notebooks, and I'll show you the most important step for my notebook solution is to make sure that I configure the session, because by default, it's going to be using all the nodes. So I want to make sure that you want to come here, you modify how many executors you want to have, how big the executor size needs to be, and you have control over this. And definitely change the session timeout. This, I don't know why we need to keep a session open for 30 minutes. You'll be billed for those vCores. So close, make sure that you minimize this as much as you want, and you modify the session timeout. So this is one way. Another way to configure the session is to, let me see if I have an option, to do it at the old-fashioned script method, and you can add it at the beginning of the notebook. So you have to do this for each notebook. Remember, this goes for each notebook, you have to configure the session level. So this will override what we have here. But even if I put here that I want 0.5 gigabytes, it will pick up the minimum that is available by default. So we won't be able to go under the minimum that is highlighted here. And finally, if I go to monitor my Apache Spark Pools, what's important to understand is that when you look at the workload and diagnostics and you see executor utilization, remember that this is the utilization of the executors at the session level. So you saw before in the notebook that we were saying, I want to use one executor with this configuration. So this is the percentage utilization of the session level configuration. It's not the Spark pool. That's important to understand as well to optimize the resources that you need to use in your session. All right. There you have a few hints for Spark pools, a few screenshots as a reminder, and we'll move on to the last one. So the last engine that we got in Azure Synapse Analytics is Azure Data Explorer. And this will come eventually out of preview, but it does apply similar to the dedicated SQL pool. When it is post, you only pay for storage. So when it's running, you also pay for compute nodes. So you make sure that you post it, and you can see it under your Manage Hub, Data Explorer. You can see that I can come here and post it. You can build some automation and scripts to post it for you. The next one, make sure you configure auto-scale properly as with the Spark Pools. And a couple of capabilities that we currently don't have, but we're going to have near in the future, is custom scale. That means that you're going to be able to scale based on a custom configuration and metrics and KPIs. And the auto pause, the option here, eventually it'll be similar to the one that we have in the Spark Pools. But currently, we don't have these two capabilities. And look, I know it's a lot of information. There you have a lot of tips and tricks for optimizing your Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. A few resources that I can share with you. But most important, yeah, stay tuned. Remember that running this event without the sponsors will be quite difficult. If you want to contact me or you come up with a question near in the future, there you have my personal details. Go and reach out and I'll be more than happy to help. And if you don't have any questions with that, I'll hand it over back to the Aussie, Matt.